Yes, now it is 10:45, so we'll begin. I'm Laurel Post. I'm one of the students who worked with Lisa at the University of Illinois on this project. Morgan Sherlock will also be talking in a little bit. And we did our topic on ResearchGate, so our presentation is entitled Behind the Gate, Early Career Researchers' Motivations for Using ResearchGate. So what is ResearchGate? ResearchGate is an academic social media tool that was a site that was founded in 2008. Their mission is to be a professional network for scientists and researchers around the world to share, discover, and discuss research. Their mission is to connect the world of science and make research open to all. So they have over 15 million members across the world. These members can sign up with ResearchGate using an academic affiliated email address. And once they do, they're able to publish, disseminate, and discover research. They can share their own publications. They can connect and collaborate with colleagues. We have one story that Morgan will talk about in a little bit about one of our participants who was following a researcher's articles and then was able to connect with the author on ResearchGate and start a conversation through that, which was really encouraging to hear. People who sign up for ResearchGate can also get statistics and see who's reading their work. There's a section to join a variety of subject-based communities to engage in discussion and collaboration, to ask questions about research projects and problems. People who sign up for ResearchGate can find jobs and share updates on current projects. So a quick look at what the main page of ResearchGate looks like. You have in the top right corner your home tab, your questions tab, which will lead you to that discussion forum. You have your jobs tab. The left side you have notifications, messaging, chat profile, and then you can add new projects that you're starring on. You can also do that from the home screen. As you can see, it says what project you're working on right now. You can update that. And then ResearchGate will also suggest articles for you, as you can see. And you can view the citation. You can request full text if there isn't any. You can follow the research, or you can share it with others. So why did we decide to study ResearchGate? Well, we found that there wasn't very much literature done on early career researchers. We found that past literature focused a lot on the studies, on statistics and trends for using ResearchGate. The motives and benefits were only being studied through surveys, and these surveys found that early career researchers, their research habits were focused on increasing visibility and demonstrating their research impact in this digital age within the scholarly communication. Early career researchers do see the potential of social media and community platforms as valuable publishing outlets. We also found that academic social networking sites were great for self-archiving, open access, and information sharing, and researchers do see benefits for sharing their articles on social media because it facilitates communication with other researchers, improves publicity, and increases citation impact. We found this especially for faculty usage through universities and department-specific research. We also found a lot of comparison between ResearchGate and institutional repositories. One study we found said that in their institution, 31% deposited their publications in ResearchGate and only 2.1% deposited their research in an institutional repository. So that led us to our inquiry, which was to investigate in-depth motives for early career researchers to join and participate in scholarly communication through ResearchGate. So our main question was, what are the motivations for early career researchers to use ResearchGate? We decided to study early career researchers because there is some literature on general publishing and career motivations, but little has been said about why ResearchGate specifically, and especially for scholars who aren't as published or prominent in their field. So we defined early career researcher as a PhD student, a postdoc student, master's, or grad student. We decided to find potential subjects to interview within the social sciences at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, particularly political science, psychology, and sociology. To find these participants, we went onto ResearchGate, and you can search by the university. So we searched by the University of Illinois, and it will list the different departments, and then you can go into the departments and see who's a member of that department and who's affiliated to the university, on ResearchGate, of course. So we pulled the profiles affiliated to each of the fields and then researched each name to determine the academic status. We invited the potential subjects through the university email to interview with Morgan and myself for about a 25 to 45-minute interview. In order to most accurately reflect participant motivations to use ResearchGate, we decided to utilize the interview survey method. It would allow participants to fully express their individual experiences with ResearchGate rather than opt into answers as they would through a survey style. While we knew going into this study we would not receive as many responses to the questions as we would a survey, our intention was to create a in-depth profile of their motivations. We also liked the interview because we could pick up on any nonverbal cues if necessary, and then the main motivation was to follow up on answers that were not expected and ask more detailed and tailored questions to each participant, because everybody uses ResearchGate differently and we want to make sure we got the full picture. So again, we looked at the 3 different disciplines of social science. We used psychology, sociology, and political science, and we wanted to evaluate the different perspectives across these early career researcher career status. There's a distinct mix between humanities and the scientific perspective, and they would have different research funding and goals would be varied among the different fields, all within the social science schools. So now I'm going to pass it off to Morgan to talk about our implications.
So when we were creating our interview protocol, it was really, really important that we were finding that layered information so we could understand those profiles. So to ensure we captured the qualitative data in a way that would be easy to analyze as well, we broke our interview protocol questions into 4 main groups. We had 26 questions prepared, and then 3 if-then questions, particularly around if a participant was published or not. So we could ask more in-depth questions based off of their publication record and everything like that. So as we can see, the protocol breaks down into general profile questions and then ResearchGate profile questions. So we would kind of ask, oh, how do you customize your profile? And then, oh, how do you use ResearchGate? How often are you signing on? And then we would kind of ask them about their relationship with ResearchGate. So that was more, how do you feel about ResearchGate? Do you have any thoughts around it, just more generally? And then that ultimately would lead to asking about their motivations for using ResearchGate. Really getting at, okay, why is it important to you? How valuable is it to you in your career? So our intention was to build up a conversation around the motivations to use ResearchGate and really try to capture that layered, in-depth information. So this is just general information about the participants we interviewed. So you can see that we had 1 student from the sociology discipline, 3 from psychology, and 3 from political science. Of the 7, 4 were published. They had published articles. 3 were unpublished. They had not published anything yet. And we also want to note that 1 participant did have quite a few published papers, the 7th-year student, who's just finishing, but unfortunately they had to be taken off of ResearchGate due to copyright infringement, so that added quite a bit of tension to that interview. So, something to note. So our findings. So across the interviews, the motivations were discussed mostly aligned with the primary goal of signing up or using ResearchGate really as a way to position themselves for future career success. We had generally a lot of quotes about the future potential to start building a network in their specific field. 1 participant pointed out, at some point in the future, to put my work out there and expand my social circle. Another participant said, in the future, to connect and collaborate. So a lot of future-oriented responses here. and just breaking down between published and unpublished, 2 participants that were published discussed the gratification of knowing that people are reading their paper and they were gaining a wider audience. So that was a huge part that we talked about with the relationship with ResearchGate, that gratification. They also claimed to see it as a useful public repository, to just have their own personal repository that they could sign up for free. And one participant was published noted that it felt like something they were supposed to do, but they weren't sure how to use it. And that last part, they weren't sure how to use it yet, was something that we also found, this unsureness, which also kind of falls into a future tool. Maybe not something that they're completely sure about yet, but something for the future. And so that was just something we wanted to point out. So yes, like we said, generally future potential. And then within this, we could also parse out a few other themes, kind of within this primary theme of positioning for future career success. That was digital self-promotion, so gaining more exposure. That was something a lot of people said, just wanted to gain more exposure to that wider audience. A participant actually said adding to online presence to signal that they're active, so really just having a pulse on the internet with their research, right? So that demonstrates a usage of ResearchGate to reinforce their reputations in a digital and wider space. So that definitely confirms some of the literature reviews that we had seen using ResearchGate to expand that way. And then of course connections with researchers was noted as well. We had a participant say that it was important for them to keep up on work that other people are doing that's related to what I'm doing, and assuming I'm going to start putting out publications, this was an unpublished participant, make others interested and aware of what I'm doing. So again, really seeing that future potential underlying in those responses, and future-oriented potential, and using ResearchGate as a career boost, as a way to network. And quick dissemination or searching for information, definitely something that people noted as well. A primary benefit or reason for using ResearchGate, we had one participant say, connect with researchers, but also quicker dissemination. And they also pointed out that maybe more discussions. They saw ResearchGate as something that maybe could be better used for a discussion base, since it is so field-oriented and subject-specific, and since it's such a wide audience, that they really wanted to see maybe ResearchGate become more of a discussion-based tool, which we thought was really interesting. Someone said that it was much more encompassing, specifically compared to Twitter, and we will get to that in a little bit, but that did naturally pop up in conversations, this comparison of ResearchGate to other social network sites, which makes sense. And then in general, we just kind of wanted to point out that 2 participants said that they joined ResearchGate initially because they didn't know how to use the library yet, and wanted to get access to an article. So that was something that they were quick to point out. They were like, I guess I signed up for ResearchGate because I couldn't find an article and I didn't know how to search the library yet, or I hadn't talked to a librarian yet. So that was one of the reasons they joined, was really just, they Googled something, saw it was available on ResearchGate, and signed up. And also 6 out of 7 of the participants responded that they, for their usage of ResearchGate, that they checked in on their profiles primarily because they received an email notification saying, hey, your profile is getting views, or here's an article that you might be interested in ResearchGate. So most of the participants said that they weren't like proactively checking ResearchGate, it was more of a reaction to an email. So just something to point out about the usage as well. Something else that we pointed out that came out with the findings in the interviews was when we talked about professional development, specifically asking, how has ResearchGate impacted your professional development? Again, we see a lot of future-oriented thinking, right? Not so far, and up to this point, it hasn't. So we'd ask, to clarify, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, how impactful is it? Lots of zeros, lots of ones. But we thought it was interesting that while everyone said it had that minimal impact, 3 participants actually did, naturally speak about these connections that they made on ResearchGate that they would not have made anywhere else. Like Laurel mentioned, a participant actually was able to speak with someone that was very prominent in their field, and that their that colleague was actually able to comment on their research, and they had a whole conversation on ResearchGate about their upcoming research, which was really interesting. They were able to share knowledge through ResearchGate. Someone noted that they were able to speak with an international colleague that they would have never met otherwise through ResearchGate. And another person noted that they couldn't find someone on Twitter, so they went to ResearchGate and they were able to find them there. So there definitely is what we would maybe see as professional development, making those connections with researchers and expanding their network. But everyone said, no, it's not really professional development for me. So maybe kind of clarifying what we mean by professional development when we're asking those questions would be interesting for the future. But as early career researchers saw it, our participants saw it, minimal impact, but still making those connections. And of course, we did ask questions, comparing ResearchGate to other social networking sites that they might be using to share their research, to read up on research, as they would use ResearchGate. In each field, at least one person said that Twitter was a faster and more popular way to share information and connect with specific people in their field. It was just part of, that is Twitter's implicit integrated way to share. So it was a little bit better in that aspect of information sharing for ResearchGate. But as I noted earlier, ResearchGate was also described as something that was more encompassing, while Twitter is specific and direct. So they kind of are able to balance each other out, it sounded like, or people were able to use it for their two different means together, and it was helpful for them. We also noticed that it was different for every field. Some fields noted that having a personal website was really important to share their research, and using that as a way to kind of have an online presence. Specifically within political science, a personal website and Twitter were very useful for sharing. Political science, it makes sense for Twitter, right? Current events is very much a part of their research. So, but then also that personal website was very important. And then for psychology, early career researchers, they all noted that Facebook was quite important for sharing information. So it is very field specific. And I think we found that was something that was very important to note as well. We did ask about the institutional repository and comparing that, and we were a little bit surprised, breaking it down between published and unpublished. So those that were published, when we asked, have you heard of the Illinois Institutional Repository and did you put your research there? Two of them had vaguely heard of it. They said maybe and asked for a little more information. And we actually, after the interviews, were able to sit down and kind of show them IDEALS, which is the University of Illinois Institutional Repository. They're like, oh, okay, that might look familiar. But, one actually had not heard of it at all who was published, and they assumed that maybe someone else had potentially put it on the institutional repository. And those were unpublished. We did have one participant who had heard of IDEALS. They had actually used it to search for their own information. So again, that really kind of ties in with this maybe misunderstanding or just unawareness of the institutional repository as a way to, as a place to put their research, as Laurel kind of mentioned with our literature review. And now kind of going into the implications of all this. So what do we take away? That is what Lisa will be speaking about. So thank you.
So one of the great things about being at the iSchool, or at the University of Illinois, is that we have an iSchool where when you have, as a faculty member, random questions that you are really hoping somebody would help you answer, you can get grad students who are like, I'd love to learn to do a research project. And so this ResearchGate I find quite fascinating. Although it's a decade old, which often surprises people when we say that, it's a decade old. In that decade, it has gained incredible traction with scholars, and its traffic is immense. It is the 7th largest trafficked science site on the internet. So it is significant for our users, and wanting to understand that role in their workflow, because from my perspective, this has huge implications for any number of groups. First, I think, as you probably started to think about, if you remember that we're talking about early career researchers here, and what they are doing with ResearchGate they are positioning their future self, as Morgan talked about. Historically, I think scholarly societies thought they were the place where you position your future self. You join that society because you're studying in that discipline, and maybe you go to that conference, go and listen to that keynote speaker or the famous person in the field. Are you able to make it up to the podium to chat with them, etc.? All of those things are things that we see these early career researchers seeing ResearchGate as a facilitating platform for. Scholarly societies, not from this research, but from other things, are generally absent from ResearchGate in any sort of presence way. It's not something that ResearchGate has facilitated either, but one could imagine that as a scholarly society, you might want to think about if there's a way to use that, if nothing else, to find out who the early career researchers are in the discipline that maybe you would like to send them a marketing email to and invite them to join that scholarly society. Because in retrospect, I wish we had asked some questions about whether they belong to scholarly societies. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that we had that question until we were through the interviews in this pilot study. So that's something I would ask in the future. But I think as scholarly societies and knowing their membership challenges, this is something I would be concerned with if I were looking in this field. I note for publishers, if we think about going upstream, which seems to be the subject of any number of Scholarly Kitchen blog posts, tools that help people go upstream, right? Can we find who's presenting posters with the Morrissey Project? Can we, Kudos has written about this with moving upstream, looking at that from a recognition perspective. You can hardly get more upstream than I haven't even scoped a research project yet, but I see myself as part of this discipline in this field. One of the things that we didn't go into here is that ResearchGate has the ability for people to show work in progress. And so if you have scholars who have not yet published, they're not showing up in any of those citation indexes. And so we could potentially start to look at whether we can start to predict the future stars, if you will, that you might want to cultivate relationships with based on what you see them doing early on ResearchGate. I think for librarians there's some interesting questions here, both from the standpoint of discovery as well as thinking about the relationship we have with our early career researchers who traditionally or who are typically excluded from most of our researcher profiling, workflow, etc. tools unless they have sort of side access via a faculty member that they're working with. So students, these early career scholars, are looking for as much exposure as possible because they need to set up their career. And if we think about the scholar as essentially a brand of one, you know, I am Lisa Hinchliff, TM, then I need as much exposure as possible as I go onto the market, as I look for research collaborators, if I'm a PhD student, when I want to get that postdoc, all of those things. Libraries, by and large, as far as I can see, have relatively little services where they have considered that what they could be doing as far as helping position their early career researchers, if you will, and exposing them through their work, their scholarship, their activities to the larger community. I also think the other thing we need to think that this challenges us to really think about, and there's a fair amount of writing with librarians being a little irritated, I would say, with people putting their things on ResearchGate rather than the institutional repository. But what I would point out is even to the degree to which that some institutions will allow graduate students to deposit into the institutional repository, that is not all of them. So many libraries actually exclude graduate students from their institutional repositories. Graduate students are looking for a place that they can use next. And I am aware of no institutional repository that says, you graduated from this institution, congratulations, you can continue to deposit your work for the rest of your fantastic career. So to the degree to which they are seeking to make a profile that will live past their affiliation with our institution, the institutional repository does nothing for them. And as a side note, not the focus here, this is what I also hear from a number of our not early career researchers, but people who intend a more itinerant academic career, which is almost everyone these days. They actually don't care to put much effort into their peer profile, our experts profile, because the moment they leave the University of Illinois, we will take it down, because they will no longer be an active faculty member at the University of Illinois. So I think this really calls into question, libraries have been questioned about the whole alumni access to resources in a discovery way, but I think there's a lot of questions we could ask ourselves, whether there's ways we should be thinking about our services to people who will be our alumni while they are there, and whether there might be some services that we'd like to see in some sort of situation that would enable us to maintain a relationship with them. So for future research, because there's always future research when we have these sorts of questions, we definitely could see that there is need for wider audience, right? This was an N of 7, which for a qualitative study is defensible, but it is limited, okay? And we admit that, including we also intentionally chose to go with social science disciplines, in part because honestly, the STEM disciplines get studied all the time in these kinds of ways, and we wanted to ask whether there is something going on for the social scientists. So obviously getting more early career researchers in different fields would be really great. And sort of what we learned in the survey, in the interviews, the other thing that I personally believe is when you go to do a survey, you should probably have done some interviews first, so you know what questions to ask on your survey. And actually, originally we were thinking of doing a survey, and I'm so glad we did the interviews first, because that survey will now be so different, including, as I mentioned, I don't think I would have ever thought to ask, well, what societies are you part of, right? And now we absolutely have to ask that question, because the implications here seem immense. There's also just a broader study to be done, I think, as now that I kind of look at this literature about what early career researchers need from their libraries more generally in their role as researchers and future researchers, and the degree to which we are helping them sort of position themselves as future researchers who are alumni of our institutions. So there's definitely a lot to ask here, and I mean, I will tell you, I have a ton of questions about all kinds of folks who are using ResearchGate that kind of puzzle me when I happen across their profiles. At the University of Illinois, I also teach a workshop face-to-face called Curating Your Online Scholarly Presence. And the wide variety of people who show up to that workshop is fascinating to me. Part of the reason we did early career researchers is because like all these people are showing up to this workshop and they've never published anything. Why are they coming to this workshop about curating your online scholarly presence when you don't have one? So now we know. But I also have people who are retiring in like a month who come to this workshop. And then everything in between. And then interestingly, I have a number of department chairs ask me to please come do a workshop specifically for the faculty in their department, because they are looking in the department to improve their profile of the department, and they see ResearchGate as a key tool to leverage their department's work into a better international profile. So with that, we will pause and are happy to take questions about the research project, the findings, or ideas that you might have about implications of what you've seen in our work. But so, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I think one of the best I've seen here. You did a great job, and I can't wait to read the public. Are you publishing the paper? Yeah, we are. We're working. Okay.
I will say the bottleneck in that right now is that the draft manuscript that they worked on and wrote is sitting in my inbox. You guys should stand up when you need, please.
Oh, yes.
You can put the manuscript on ResearchGate then.
Yeah, we'll put it on the presentation. My question is, so I'm from the MIT Press, and I'm in marketing for my sins. So I am both professionally and personally deeply conflicted about, because these are companies that coordinate for advertising dollars. Facebook is a social media apparatus, but it is also a company that sells access to people. It's an advertising company. Google is not a search company, it's an advertising company. And ResearchGate is a for-profit social network, and I remain deeply concerned about that for the future of academia. And so I'm wondering if you looked into nonprofit, organizations that are interested in privacy, potentially ORCID, that might serve as alternatives. Of course, the issues with the IRs that they tend to be silos. But I'm curious if your research led you to alternatives to ResearchGate, and if that's something that you
So I don't think the study was really designed to kind of probe in that. I think the most interesting thing that's found is, you said like everyone talked about Twitter almost.
Yes.
So
Even before we asked, because we did ask, just broadly, okay, so what social network sites are you using to share your research besides ResearchGate? Twitter. That was it. We did ask if, we say, oh, what about LinkedIn for professional development? No way. And then, it's probed a little bit further Facebook, but yeah, it was primarily Twitter, and that came up naturally, so, yeah.
One of the question I might say, if the model that we found that wasn't ad-based, this couple of images.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat. Tommy asked if a model could be found that was not ad-based, could ResearchGate be seen as more legitimate? Fair? Okay. So I would like to say that I don't think our participants believe that ResearchGate is illegitimate. So that's the first thing I think we need to settle, which is, while I wholeheartedly understand that there are many people who have many qualms about ResearchGate, those people are by and large not the people using ResearchGate. Those are the people not using ResearchGate. So, having said that, if you are asking whether they could achieve a sort of more welcome status within the community, that's the people who are more critical. I think that there is a group of people for whom any for-profit group is going to be problematic. I don't think ResearchGate is going to become not-for-profit, so that group is not going to be satisfied. I actually don't think that the concern is it being ad-based so much as it being analytics. And it's very clear that ResearchGate has an immense amount of information about what people do on that platform, and given its traffic, we can know that they have an immense amount of information. They also have a citation graph that is connecting, this article is cited by that article. It knows who the collaborators are, so there's a social graph of who I've co-authored with. There's a lot going on there that actually might, if they were able to monetize it, might actually make a number of people more concerned. So, again though, the 7 early career researchers, any concerns about legitimacy?
Yeah. Never even came up.
Never came up.
No.
Only useful.
Yeah.
So you're looking at basically PhD students or other grad students, postdocs. Any consideration of expanding this out a few years? So first, second, third year of a tenure track position, or contingent faculty who are more itinerant, what that looks like in terms of usage? Do things change in terms of their perspectives or actual usage?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that would be really interesting to see how maybe it's evolved, especially, we've taken this study, right, or these interviews. Now we can maybe see, are things changing? Are expectations changing? Has the idea of professional development changed a little bit too? Their expectations as well. I think that'd be really fascinating. Use it as a comparison and just see how it grows.
So I think one of the things to sort of put context here, since Morgan and Laurel were Masters in Library Science students, one of the things I've learned to do as a faculty member in the library is to make the project small enough to be done in one semester. Now, one of the things I will say is, they didn't know yet that you can't do a research project in one semester. So if I'd said to any of you, we're gonna like interview a bunch of early career researchers and get it done in 3 months, you would have been like, that's not possible. So scoping just becomes really important for these projects to be doable in an independent study kind of model. So I think all of those groups that you just mentioned are completely important to understand, and I think what's particularly important to understand is that these are diverse groups. So what we saw with the early career researchers are not what I think we're going to necessarily see with people who are, tenured, full professors, solid in their field. They might have different motivations and different patterns of activity. But on the other hand, we should find that out. That's my hypothesis, right? So one of the things that I have considered doing out of this is developing a protocol that then we could potentially do like a collaborative research project with different librarians interested in interviewing different groups of folks, where we could sort of get a mosaic coming. But, they're graduating, so they're not obligated.
Hire me.
Anyone from New Orleans?
You mentioned Twitter, and I was wondering where are they posting because you can't upload PDFs on Twitter, so they must have to link their work on Twitter. So where are those links going to? Where are they posting it if they're mentioning it on Twitter? Do you know about that?
I think with a lot of them, it's more of a discussion on Twitter that will lead to research. And then again, with what Morgan said about political science, they have their own personal websites, so they're most likely linking to the personal websites. But a lot of it's just those threads and discussions that they're having on Twitter.
But I think the other answer is to ResearchGate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so if you're like, all right, here's where I'm hosting my content, but here's where I'm sort of promoting it or dialoguing about it, then you're going to post, and then, yeah. So, Anthony.
Well, again, I came in halfway through as probably so I couldn't find a room. I should know by 35 years here, I should know. But there used to be somebody sitting outside. This is a nice piece of work, I think, and a lovely piece of work. I wish I'd known from the beginning. We've done some work on early career researchers, but we interviewed, and that's the same as you did, because it's a good idea, isn't it? You'll get more out of it. Who sits down and survey, which is going to be a different sample. I didn't find quite so much enthusiasm for ResearchGate, though I was only working in the US and the UK, and some of my colleagues who were in other countries got more enthusiasm. My own boss is very enthusiastic, and he sticks all my stuff out there. But if you look and see what they've done with it, quite often they're slightly worried by what they hear about not being entirely clear. You can't usually, in many cases, go direct to the article, to the item. That's a response to being slightly worried and like that. They don't mind you going to it through them, as long as they're interposing. So that's something that came up with us a little bit nervous. But it's lovely. I agree almost entirely with everything you said, is what we got from other American universities.
So to your credit, and you may not realize if you don't know who this is, your work is in our literature review as far as the early career researchers. One of the things I will say that is I think a little bit different here is since our protocol involved finding people who are on ResearchGate and then contacting them to ask them, could we please talk to you about ResearchGate? I think the people, clearly we were looking for people who did do stuff on ResearchGate. So I think we had at least one person write and be like, oh yeah, I made that account, I don't do anything with it. So we didn't interview them. So this this is, I think there's a sampling issue here, so we have particular sampling rate. Yeah.
We're not looking primarily.
Right,
We were looking at social media, but we had the same sort of remarks.
Yeah.
Well, we went across the board on the scope,
Yeah.
as you know, but this is lovely, and I'd like to do something like that with literary journals, and try to get to do that, because you can see very clearly it was on them. But yes, it's a good way of starting things. Yes. But we had the same experience with Twitter and Facebook. But we had 20% who didn't use social media at all. For professional purposes, I'm saying. They immediately said, go here because I use Facebook for fun. But 20%, and I'm talking about here in the UK. Not in France where they use social media all the time. But good luck in this and got together.
Thank you.
I'm curious, you mentioned nonverbal cues at the beginning, and I was just curious as to what you sense the overall tone or emotional feel was. And I know it's a really kind of tricky question to answer. But did you get more of a sense of enthusiasm, or was it more of obligation and dread?
So the question was about nonverbal cues and how, like if there was enthusiasm or dread in the interviews, like what we picked up. And for the most part, it was, some were a little hesitant to talk about because, like the 7th year who had his stuff taken down, he was a little hesitant just because he was a little frustrated with the process of everything, getting his stuff out, his work out. But a lot of them like seemed very enthusiastic for the future. They definitely see this as something really beneficial for the future. Again, a lot of them were a little unsure about how they're going to make it work because they haven't been published, but they see the potential, and you can see that they were excited for it.
Yeah, we noticed a lot of nervousness, and some participants, it was really hard to get. They were just like, I just said I would come here, but I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I don't even know if you want to talk to me. We actually had a couple people say that. They were like, I signed up, but I don't really think I have much to add. You would get that in the nonverbal cues, kind of that shying away and scrunching shoulders. But yeah.
I mean, this was much more informal, but anytime I was talking to graduate students about it, they're kind of like, I'm on it, or I will be on it. I have to do it.
I have to do it.
I'm
Yeah.
not super excited about it, but I will do it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good for them. Yeah. Definitely saw that.
I think the other thing I would say is one of the reasons I was particularly happy to have them interested in this is because I think that at least talking to other graduate students lowered the nervousness barrier, even though people were still nervous, as opposed to, hi, I'm this like librarian who wants to, professor who wants to talk to you about this. So I think that's another thing, especially if you're thinking about doing these kind of interviews, is to really think about the positionality of the person doing the interviews. Some people might be nervous about having graduate students go do the interviews saying, well, they don't have years of experience interviewing people. But for me, the trade-off here is I can train them to be a better interviewer. I can't get those students to see me as an equal, because I'm not, and we have a power relationship. And so for me, the trade-off there is obvious, is that you go with, teach the skills. We read books together, we reviewed our protocol. It had to go through IRB, so we did all of that in order to create sort of an interviewer-interviewee relationship that would be more comfortable. So I think same thing could happen if you're thinking about contingent faculty or anyone who's in a more precarious position. Going to talk to full professors who got Nobel Prizes, like, not a problem. But, anyone who's in a precarious position, I think as researchers, we have a really strong ethical obligation to think about. And the other thing is, one interesting thing about this IRB is we're asking them about a public profile. So we had to be clear that we could not promise them anonymity or even confidentiality. We could say that we could do our best, and we let them choose a pseudonym if they wanted one. But they put the profile up with their name, institution, and department, and we're going to be saying those things. So we had to also be really ethical about saying, we can't promise you that if you're in this interview study, that somebody won't be able to figure out who you are. So. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.